His eyes always looked dangerous in the dark, but if you watched closely, you'd see it, the tiny, trembling kindness he tried so hard to hide. People called him monster, king, hunter, yet in the quiet hours of the night, he was just a lonely soul afraid of what his own heart might do. The moon hung low over the ancient city, washing the stone roofs in silver. Wind slid through broken church windows like a whisper, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and old incense. High above the sleeping world, on the edge of a worn cathedral tower, the vampire king stood alone, his black cloak stirring around him like restless shadows. His name was Caelan. To mortals, he was a legend meant to scare children into staying indoors. To his own people, he was the silent ruler of the night court, feared for his power but respected for his control. Only he knew the price of that control, the endless hunger he kept chained, the compassion he buried so deep it almost suffocated him. He looked down at the city streets where little windows glowed with warm candlelight. Families, laughter, human hearts beating in fragile rhythm. He could hear every pulse, feel every shiver of life. It would have been so easy to take whatever he wanted. One simple thought, one step from the tower, and he could be down there among them, feeding, owning, conquering. Instead, Caelan tightened his fingers around the cold stone ledge until bits of it crumbled under his grip. "Your restraint weakens us," a voice once had told him. His father, the previous king, whose memory still haunted this very tower. "A crown cannot be held with gentle hands, my son. Mercy is the first crack in the throne." Caelan exhaled slowly, watching his breath vanish into the night. His father had ruled with iron and fire. Caelan ruled with silence and distance. It was the only way he knew to keep others safe from what he was capable of. If he never let anyone close, he could never lose control. If he remained the cold king in the high tower, no one would see the man beneath the monster. Yet tonight, something felt wrong. There was a tremor in the air, a disturbance in the rhythm of the city's heartbeats. Caelan tilted his head slightly, closing his eyes. The night spoke to him in sounds most could never hear, the rustle of a stray cat, the crack of shifting wood, a carriage wheel turning slowly down a far-off road. And then he heard it. A single heartbeat, fast, frantic, alone. It pulsed through the darkness like a small, desperate drum. Not the steady, lazy rhythm of someone resting in bed, but the stumbling, panicked race of a human in danger. His eyes opened, and they flashed a deep crimson before he forced the color back to calm. He told himself to turn away. It wasn't his problem. He had sworn never again to interfere directly in human affairs. The last time he'd paid in blood and loss, and the memory of it still sat in his chest like cold iron. He could still see her face, another human, many years ago, eyes full of trust right before everything went wrong. He shut that memory down. But the sound was getting faster now, more broken. A short, choked sob carried faintly to his ears, dragged by the wind from the alleys below. A young woman's voice. Human, terrified. Caelan's jaw clenched. Night court law was simple. Humans were to be left to their own fates unless they trespassed on vampiric ground. His council would punish any sign of softness. His enemies would use it against him. A compassionate king, they would say, is a king ready to fall. He closed his eyes again, as if he could shut out the entire city. He could still feel his father's cold hand on his shoulder, years ago, on the day of his coronation. "You are not their savior, Caelan. You are their shadow, their reminder that fear keeps order. Never forget what you are." But what he was, right now, was torn. Another sob reached him, closer this time. Then a cry, quickly muffled, as if a hand had been clamped over someone's mouth. Caelan's body moved before his mind made a decision. One moment he stood on the tower, the next he was gone, the air rippling where he had been. The alley where he appeared was narrow and slick with recent rain, the lamplight from the main street barely touching its walls. The smells here were sharp and sour, Wet stone, old garbage, rusted metal. Somewhere deeper inside the darkness, the heartbeat pounded like a drum in his ears. Caelan walked, not rushed, but every step precise and silent. His cloak whispered along the ground, shadows folding around him like a living thing. He did not breathe, did not speak. He simply followed the sound that had dragged him from his lonely tower. As he turned a corner, he saw her. A young woman stood with her back pressed hard against the brick wall, hands fisted at her sides. Her hair was damp and tangled, clinging to her cheeks. A thin cut marked her forehead where she had apparently fallen, and traces of dirt streaked her dress. Her eyes were wide, wild, and shining with unshed tears. Facing her were two men, rough-looking, arguing in hushed, angry voices. One of them grabbed her wrist. She flinched but didn't cry out this time, as if she had already realized no one was coming. No one except him. Caelan's first instinct was dark and swift, remove the threat. He could cross the distance in a blink, separate the men from their lives before they even felt fear. It would be easy. It would be simple. It would be exactly what everyone expected of a monster king. "Let her go," Caelan said quietly. The words were not loud, but they carried. The men froze, then slowly turned. Fear passed over their faces the instant they saw him. Even in the low, flickering light, his presence was unmistakable. Unnatural stillness, eyes too calm, features too perfect to be fully human. His mere existence bent the air around him. Lord Caelan," one of them stammered, as color drained from his face. He recognized the king. Most did, even if they had only seen drawings or heard whispers, the pale, ageless monarch of the night. The young woman's gaze flicked between them, confusion mixing with fear. She didn't know who he was, not really. She only knew that the other men suddenly cowered. "This is none of your concern, my king," the second man said, recovering some of his bravado, though his voice shook. "She stole from us, a thief. She must be taught a lesson, that is all." Caelan's eyes shifted, just once, to the girl. She held his gaze for half a heartbeat, and in that brief moment he saw something that hurt more than any sword could. She was expecting cruelty from him, too. The way her shoulders tightened, the way her lips trembled but pressed into a thin line, as if already preparing to endure whatever came. He had spent centuries building a wall between what he felt and what he showed. Tonight, something cracked. "What did she steal?" Caelan asked. The first man hesitated, then lifted a small cloth pouch. It jingled softly. "Coin, my lord, from our cart. She took it and ran." "I was going to return it," the girl finally whispered, voice raw. "I was hungry. I just wanted to see if I could. I got scared. I'm sorry." Her honesty startled him. She didn't lie. She didn't beg. She simply stood there, shaking, and admitted her fault like someone who had nothing left to protect. Caelan stepped closer, and the men instinctively backed away. He did not look at them yet. His eyes stayed on the girl. "What is your name?" he asked, his tone softer than it had been in years. Silence stretched tight between them. A drop of rain fell from an overhead gutter and landed near her foot, making her flinch. "Elena," she said at last. "My name is Elena." He let the name settle in his mind. Elena, not the thief, not the girl, but a person. A life warm and flickering right in front of him. For a moment, he forgot the alley, forgot the laws, forgot the watchful eyes of his court somewhere in the deeper shadows. One of the men cleared his throat. "My lord, she cannot be allowed to walk away without punishment, if people see." Caelan raised a hand, and the man's words died instantly. Every part of him understood the logic. Mercy created stories, stories traveled, soon others would test the king's limits. Chaos would follow. Mercy had its own kind of cost, and kings were poor in ways that had nothing to do with gold. Yet he could not shake the image of Elena's eyes, wide and tired, the way she'd said, "I was hungry," as if hunger was something she deserved. A storm churned quietly inside him. Duty against compassion, fear against instinct, the ghost of his father's harsh voice against the fragile human sound of her own. Caelan took the pouch of coins from the man's shaking hand. He weighed it thoughtfully, the metal clinking softly inside. Then he turned toward Elena again. "How long have you been hungry?" he asked. Her brows drew together as if she didn't know how to answer. "Long enough," she whispered. Does it matter?" He studied her, and the old, dangerous part of him whispered that this was how it always started, with one question, one small exception, one human face that slipped past the armor he'd worked so hard to build. One heart that made his own remember it was still there. It struck him with strange, painful clarity. This human girl could be the beginning of his undoing. Footsteps echoed faintly at the end of the alley, someone approaching, slow and careful. Caelan's sensitive hearing picked it up before anyone else. More witnesses, perhaps, or worse. One of his own council, tracking their king's movements, ready to report any sign of weakness. His time to decide was shrinking. Caelan looked at Elena again, and something in his expression softened, just for a heartbeat. He thought of the promise he had made long ago, to never again let his compassion place a human in the unknowable storm of his world. Yet here she stood, and he had already stepped into the storm for her. "Elena," he said quietly, his decision forming like ice and fire in the same breath. "What I choose now will change both of our lives." She watched him, confused, tearful, not understanding the weight of the moment. The men shifted nervously, glancing toward the distant sound of footsteps drawing nearer. Caelan's fingers closed slowly around the coin pouch as he took one small step forward, standing fully between her and the world. The air thickened. The night seemed to lean closer, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of king he truly was. And in that fragile, silent instant, caught between his crown and his conscience, between the ghost of his father and the tremor of a single mortal heartbeat, Caelan realized something that made his own heart lurch with quiet fear. Whatever choice he made now, there would be no turning back. The approaching footsteps grew louder, stopping just beyond the mouth of the alley. A shadow fell across the entrance, tall and still, watching. Caelan slowly lifted his head to meet that unseen gaze, then turned back toward Elena, his eyes burning with a decision he had not yet dared to speak aloud. His eyes always looked distant, as if he lived half in this world and half in a storm only he could see. But when he looked at her, just for a second, that storm cleared, and you could almost believe he was capable of something gentler than fear. The figure at the mouth of the alley stepped forward, boots echoing softly on wet stone. Caelan didn't turn his body, but every sense sharpened. The scent of cold metal, the faint trace of old parchment and candle smoke. He knew that presence well. "Your Majesty," a calm voice said, "the council will be intrigued to hear where the king spends his evenings." Lucian. His high counselor, his oldest advisor, the one who knew every law Caelan was supposed to uphold, and every weakness he was never allowed to show. The two men who had cornered Elena backed away even farther at the sound of Lucian's voice. They bowed their heads quickly, unsure which was more dangerous. The king who had just stepped between them and their victim, or the counselor who now blocked their escape. "Lucian," Caelan replied without turning. His voice was smooth, controlled. He did not let it crack, even though the weight of the moment pressed heavy against his spine. "You're out late." "As are you, my king." Lucian's footsteps moved closer, slow and measured, and in very delicate company. Caelan could feel Lucian's eyes take in the scene. The girl pressed against the wall, dirt on her dress and fear in her eyes. The two men, pale and trembling, the coin pouch in Caelan's hand. "A thief," Lucian observed quietly. "Human, This alley is outside our jurisdiction. According to Night Court tradition, we do not intervene in their disputes unless they trespass on our lands. You yourself signed that decree." Caelan's grip tightened on the pouch. He remembered signing it, remembered the cold night in the council chamber, the arguments, the logic. Distance kept peace. Interference drew wars. "I remember," Caelan said. Elena's eyes flicked between them, confusion deepening into a kind of shocked disbelief. She had expected cruelty, but what she was seeing now was something stranger. A king who seemed trapped, not by chains, but by his own choices. Lucian moved close enough now that Elena could see his face. Austere, elegant, every line of it crafted by centuries of careful control. His gaze rested on her for a moment, cool and assessing, then returned to Caelan. "Release her to them," Lucian said softly. "Let the humans deal with their own. If she stole, they will decide her punishment. It is not our place to interfere, especially not publicly." The men straightened slightly, hope flickering in their eyes. Whatever they intended to do with Elena, they clearly preferred a world where she had no protector. Caelan heard their quickened heartbeats, the way their breath tasted of sudden relief. He also heard Elena's, a small, fast bird trapped in a cage, fluttering desperately. When Lucian spoke of punishment, her hands curled tighter at her sides. She didn't plead. She didn't speak, but her eyes closed as if bracing for impact. In that small, quiet movement, Caelan saw every human who had ever been left alone with their fear. "I am the king of this city," Caelan said, at last turning his head to look at Lucian. His voice was calm, but a faint tremor of something deeper ran beneath it. "Day and night, shadows and light, am I not?" Lucian's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course, you rule the night, but there are reasons we keep lines drawn, my king." "Lines," Caelan repeated softly. His gaze slid back to Elena. "Do the lines care if she is hungry?" Lucian answered with silence. The men shifted their weight uneasily, suddenly unsure which way the night was leaning. Elena opened her eyes, surprise flickering there. No one had ever asked if her hunger mattered. Hunger had always been a fact, like cold or rain, something she endured quietly because no one cared to see it. "My lord," the braver of the two men said, trying again, "if you show mercy to a thief in front of witnesses, others will believe they can steal as well. We work hard for our coin. You strike fear into weak hands," Caelan interrupted, voice still low, "and call it justice." The man swallowed hard, his face draining of color. I did not mean." "Enough," Lucian said sharply, though the word was mostly directed at Caelan. "Your Majesty, you know how fragile our peace is. The humans fear us just enough to stay out of our way. The council respects you because you are firm. If word spreads that you spared a thief simply because she looked at you with frightened eyes, they will not see compassion. They will see a crack." He stepped closer still, until he stood at Caelan's shoulder, voice dropping to something only the vampire king could hear. "Do you remember what mercy cost you last time?" A flash, unbidden, unwanted, stabbed through Caelan's mind. A different alley, a different human, a promise he had made and could not keep, blood he hadn't meant to spill. A soft voice that had said, "I'm not afraid of you," right before the world tore itself apart. His jaw tightened. His eyes closed for half a second, just long enough for the memory to stab deep. Then he forced it back into the darkness where he kept all his ghosts. "Yes," Caelan said quietly, "I remember." Elena watched them, her breath shallow. She had no idea what history passed between these two powerful creatures of the night, but she could feel one thing clearly. The king was standing on the edge of something. She swallowed, finding just enough courage to speak. If you let them take me," she said, her voice shaking but steady, "I won't blame you." All eyes turned to her. "You don't know me," she continued, looking straight at Caelan now. You don't owe me anything. I did steal. I thought I could run before they caught me. I was wrong. She drew in a trembling breath. Kings don't change their rules for people like me. Her words were not bitter. They were quiet, tired, as if they were simply how the world had always been. She wasn't challenging him. She was freeing him. And somehow, that hurt worse. People like you, Caelan repeated, the phrase landing heavily on his tongue. What does that mean, Elena? She hesitated, then lifted her chin the smallest bit. Small, replaceable, easy to forget. For the first time in a long while, Caelan felt something close to anger, but not at her, and not even at the men. At the way the world had taught her to measure her own worth so cheaply. You are not replaceable, he said before he could stop himself. Silence followed, thick and stunned. Even Lucian's composure flickered for the briefest instant. Caelan realized what he had done. He had spoken his heart instead of his crown. Lucian's voice slid back into the space like a blade. My king, with respect, your sentiment is noted, but your duty. My duty, Caelan interrupted, turning fully now to face him. The alley seemed to shrink around them, the air itself holding its breath. My duty is to keep this city from devouring itself. That includes keeping the strong from crushing the weak simply because they can. Lucian's eyes hardened. By breaking your own decrees. Caelan glanced once more at Elena. Rain had begun to fall, light and gentle at first, dotting her hair and lashes with tiny, trembling beads. A shiver ran through her as the chill seeped in, but she held his gaze with a fragile kind of bravery. This girl, who called herself small and replaceable, had spoken to a vampire king as if he were only a man standing in front of her. No flattery. No calculated fear, just simple truth and apology. His father's words echoed again. You are not their savior. And for the first time, Caelan wondered if that had always been nothing more than a warning spoken by a king who had never been brave enough to try. Very slowly, Caelan placed the coin pouch back into Elena's hands. Her mouth parted in shock. The men stared, speechless. Even the rain seemed to hang mid-fall for half a breath. You will repay this debt, Caelan said, his voice carrying a strange new kind of authority. Not with blood, not with suffering, with work. Work, Elena repeated, barely above a whisper. You will come to the old cathedral at dawn tomorrow, Caelan continued, his eyes never leaving hers. There is a kitchen there, a shelter. You will help the women who serve food to the poor. You will scrub floors, wash dishes, carry water. For as many mornings as it takes for this amount of coin to mean less than your honesty does tonight. Her fingers tightened around the pouch, as if unsure whether it was real. You have a kitchen. Lucian stared at Caelan, stunned. You would expose our sanctuary. Our sanctuary feeds human children every winter, Caelan said sharply. Do not pretend you have not seen the lines outside its doors, Lucian. The counselor's lips pressed into a thin line. He had seen them. He had just never expected the king to speak of it out loud, in front of humans. Caelan turned to the two men. You will accept this arrangement. Your coin will be returned in service. If you refuse, I will personally audit your business and see how much of your hard-earned gold came from fear and desperation. Their eyes widened in panic. They had heard stories of the night court's audits. Quiet, invasive, mercilessly precise. And no, my lord, one of them stammered. We accept. The girl can work instead. Yes, the other agreed quickly. Work, that's fair. Both bowed repeatedly, then backed out of the alley as if fleeing a storm they wanted no part of. Within moments, their footsteps faded into the sound of rain and distant street noise. The alley felt larger with them gone, but the tension had not lifted. If anything, it had sunk deeper. Lucian stepped closer, expression darker now. You just rewrote your own law in front of a human commoner. I refined it, Caelan replied. Mercy is not the opposite of order, Lucian. Sometimes it is the only way to keep it from rotting. Elena swallowed hard, struggling to find words. Why? She asked. Why are you doing this? You said yourself it will change things for you. Caelan looked at her, a long, searching glance that seemed to measure not her worth, but his own. Rain slid down his pale face, darkening the fabric of his cloak. Because, he said quietly, I am tired of being a king who only knows how to keep people afraid of the dark. I would like, just once, to see if I can keep someone safe in it. Elena's breath caught. Something in her chest, long buried under hunger and disappointment, flickered weakly to life. Lucian watched them both, the weight of centuries in his gaze. You are letting your heart speak, Caelan, he said in a low, warning tone. You know where that led before. Caelan's eyes darkened at the memory, but he did not look away from Elena. Then perhaps, he replied, it is time I stop running from what my heart remembers. A tremor ran through Lucian's composure. For the first time, a hint of real fear entered his eyes, not of the humans, not of the council, but of the changes he saw taking root in his king. This girl, Lucian whispered, will be the end of your peace. Or the beginning of something better, Caelan answered. Elena stood there, caught between two worlds she didn't understand, holding coins she did not deserve and a promise she wasn't sure how to trust. The rain thickened, mist turning to a soft, steady curtain, blurring the edges of the alley. Tomorrow, Caelan repeated to her, voice gentle but firm. Dawn, the old cathedral doors. If you do not come, I will know. And I will remember that you chose fear over the second chance you asked for without words tonight. She nodded slowly, the weight of all of it pressing down on her. I'll come, she whispered. I promise. Their eyes met one last time, a fragile thread of understanding stretching between them. King and commoner, vampire and human, shadow and flickering light. Then Caelan stepped back, the night moving with him like a living cloak. He turned away, the outline of his form blurring slightly in the rain. As he passed by Lucian, the counselor spoke under his breath, his voice almost lost in the falling water. You know what the prophecy says, my king. If you give your heart to a mortal again, the night court will bleed. Caelan paused, just once, just long enough for the words to pierce him. Without looking back, he murmured, perhaps the court needs to remember it still has blood. And then, with a whisper of air and a shiver of shadows, he was gone, leaving Elena alone in the alley, clutching the coin pouch, rain running down her face like tears she hadn't decided to cry yet. Behind her, distant and echoing through the empty streets, the ancient cathedral bell began to toll midnight. She stood there, soaked and shivering, staring at the place where the vampire king had just been, as one cold, impossible thought pushed its way into her mind. A monster had just saved her. And somewhere high above the city, in a tower where no human had ever stood, that same monster was realizing, with a fear deeper than any war, that tonight, without meaning to, he had taken the first step onto a path he might never be able to leave. Sometimes a single night cuts your life into two pieces, before you met someone and after. Elena didn't know it yet, but the moment she saw the vampire king in that alley, her before had quietly ended. Dawn crept into the city like a shy guest, brushing pale light over the rooftops and soaking the sky in soft gray. The streets were still mostly empty, slick with last night's rain. A cart rumbled slowly past, the driver half asleep, the wooden wheels creaking in rhythm with the waking world. Elena walked with small, careful steps toward the old cathedral, clutching the worn coin pouch so tightly her fingers ached. The cut on her forehead had crusted over, and her dress was still damp at the hem, but her eyes were clearer. Not calm, not safe, just different. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him again, those strange, distant eyes that had softened when she said she was hungry. The way he had stepped between her and danger without raising his voice. The way the other men had looked at him, like someone staring at a storm they knew could break them with a thought. He could have let them drag her away. He didn't. Her chest tightened as another thought slipped in, quieter, more frightening than the memory of the alley. What if he had only been testing her? What if this was some game the rich and powerful played, giving crumbs of hope only to snatch them back in the morning? "You don't owe me anything," she had told him. And yet, here she was, walking toward the cathedral at dawn, because a monster had told her she had a second chance, and somehow she believed him. The old cathedral rose before her like a sleeping giant, its stone walls stained with age and weather. Ivy crawled up its sides, clutching at the cracked statues, and the once grand doors were scarred by time. But the bell tower still stood tall, cutting a proud, lonely shape against the pale sky. Elena hesitated at the bottom of the worn steps. Her heart thudded unevenly. The world around her felt too quiet. "Dawn," he'd said, "the old cathedral doors." This was the place. She drew in a sharp breath and climbed, each step echoing beneath her thin shoes. At the top, she raised a trembling hand and knocked. For a few moments, nothing happened, just the sound of distant birds and the faint murmur of the waking city. She almost turned to leave, convinced she'd been foolish to come at all. Then the door creaked open. A small woman stood in the gap, wiping her hands on a faded apron. Her hair was streaked with gray and pulled back in a loose bun, and her dark eyes scanned Elena from head to toe with a mixture of concern and suspicion. "You're early," the woman said, voice rough but not unkind. "That's better than late. What happened to your head?" I fell," Elena replied quickly. It wasn't entirely a lie. The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing her but choosing not to push. "Name?" "Elena." The woman nodded once. "I'm Sister Mari's. He said you might come." "He." The word slid through Elena's chest like a warm and cold breeze at the same time. The king?" she asked, barely trusting her own voice. Sister Mari's eyes softened in a way Elena didn't expect. Him. Doesn't come down often, but when he does, it's never for nothing. Come in, child. We have much to do if we're going to feed hungry bellies today." The cathedral interior was a surprise. Elena had expected cold stone and damp echoes, but the air inside was warm and thick with the smell of baking bread, herbs, and something comforting she couldn't quite name. Sunlight filtered in through cracked stained glass windows, painting the floor with soft, broken colors. Long tables stretched down the nave, lined with simple wooden benches. Pots boiled gently over a row of stoves in what had once been a side chapel. Women moved back and forth, stirring, chopping, carrying buckets of water. A few men repaired benches or swept the floor. There was a quiet rhythm to it all, ordinary and sacred at the same time. "This used to be only for prayer," Sister Mari said, leading her toward the kitchen area. "Now we pray with our hands as much as with our words." Elena's eyes stung unexpectedly. She had passed this cathedral a dozen times and never guessed that, behind its worn doors, strangers were preparing food for people like her. Why do you do this?" she asked. Sister Mari's gave her a sharp, sideways look that softened almost immediately. "Because hungry people don't listen to sermons, child. They listen to their empty stomachs." She paused, then added, "And because someone powerful decided that letting them starve was bad for his conscience." "You mean the king," Elena said. "I mean a man who thinks he's hiding his heart better than he is," the sister replied. "You'll see." Elena was given a bucket and a cloth and set to scrubbing the long wooden tables. At first her movements were stiff, unsure. She was used to working, but not in places where people spoke kindly or bothered to learn her name. As she worked, she listened. The women talked as they prepared the food. They mentioned families she didn't know, children by name, old injuries, tiny joys. They also mentioned him, not in fear, but with a strange, puzzled respect. He sent extra flour last winter, when the storm ruined the harvest. He paid for the healer when Tomas's son fell and broke his leg. Doesn't want anyone to know, though. Always tells us to say anonymous donor when people ask. Elena paused, cloth in hand. Anonymous. Of course. It would be dangerous for the Vampire King's reputation if people knew he funded a kitchen and a shelter in an old cathedral, feeding the same humans who whispered about him in fear at night. Why hide it? Elena asked softly as Sister Mari's passed by with a stack of bowls. Because kindness from monsters confuses people, the sister replied. And confused people start asking questions. Questions make old, comfortable lies tremble. Some folk don't like that. Elena thought of Lucian, the counselor in the alley, his elegant face unreadable, his eyes sharp. She understood, suddenly, that the king's greatest danger might not be angry humans at all. It might be his own court. By mid-morning, sweat dampened Elena's neck, and her arms ached from hauling water and scrubbing. But with every table she wiped, every pot she helped wash, a small piece of last night's fear loosened its grip on her chest. Maybe this was all he wanted. Maybe this was their trade, a moment of mercy for days of honest work. Maybe she would never see him again. The thought hurt more than she liked. Rest, Sister Mari said at last, placing a hand on her shoulder. You'll fall over if you don't sit for a bit. Come. They sat on a bench near a cracked pillar, the sounds of simmering pots and clattering dishes filling the air like a busy, comforting song. Sunlight brushed Elena's face through a broken stained glass saint, painting her cheeks with a faint halo of blue and gold. You did well, Sister Mari said. You work like someone who's had to survive more than she should. Elena swallowed. I don't want him to regret helping me. The old woman watched her carefully. Is that what you're worried about, his regret? Elena stared down at her hands. I don't have much, not a home, not a family, but I do have my word. If I say I'll do something, I do it. He took a risk on me. I don't want to prove everyone right who thinks mercy is wasted on people like me. The sister was quiet for a moment. What did he say to you in that alley? She asked gently. Elena hesitated. The memory felt private somehow, precious, but she answered anyway. He said that I'm not replaceable, she whispered, like it shocked him that I thought I was. Sister Mari's lips pressed together briefly, fighting a smile that wasn't simple amusement. It was something softer, sadder. Ah, she murmured. So he let you see the part he hides. Hides, Elena repeated, looking up. The kind part, the sister replied. The one he thinks will destroy him if he lets it rule too often. Elena frowned. Why would kindness destroy him? The older woman sighed, glancing up toward the shadowed rafters, where dust floated lazily in the light. Because he wears a crown made of fear, child, and any crack in that crown makes his enemies greedy. Before Elena could answer, the heavy wooden door at the far end of the cathedral creaked open. The entire room shifted. Conversations dipped, movements slowed, as if the air itself thickened. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was a deep, quiet awareness, like the hush that falls before a storm or a prayer. Elena turned. He walked in with the morning light behind him, casting his form into a dark, sharp silhouette. As he stepped forward, the details of his face emerged. The pale, almost luminous skin, the dark hair falling smoothly over his forehead, the eyes that looked like they had seen too many nights and never quite made peace with any of them. Caelan, the Vampire King. He wore no crown, no jewels. Only a simple dark coat and gloves, his cloak folded neatly over one arm. If you didn't know who he was, you might mistake him for a nobleman who had lost his way in the poorer district. but everyone here knew. They bowed their heads slightly, not in the rigid, terrified way of subjects greeting a tyrant, but with a strange mix of respect and confusion. He nodded back once, a small gesture that somehow carried both command and humility. Elena's heartbeat stumbled, then sped up. He hadn't said he would be here. She hadn't expected him to come. As his gaze swept the room, she suddenly became painfully aware of the dirt under her nails, the sweat on her neck, the patched places on her dress. Part of her wanted to hide behind the pillar, to become small again, invisible. Instead, she sat up straighter. She had kept her promise. She had come. She had worked. Whatever happened next, that was something no one could take from her. Sister Maris rose and walked toward Caelan, speaking with him in low tones. They stood near a table as one of the women brought a shallow box filled with folded papers and ledgers. Caelan removed one glove carefully, his long fingers deft as he sifted through the pages. Elena watched his hands, not his face. Those hands could break stone. She had felt the power in him just by standing near it. Yet he turned each fragile page with almost ridiculous care, as if afraid of tearing even a corner. He's gentle, she realized. He doesn't want to be, but he is. Sister Maris pointed out numbers, lists of supplies, notes about families in need. Caelan listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his brow furrowing slightly at certain names. He knows them, Elena whispered, more to herself than anyone else. He knows the people. Too well, came Lucian's familiar, cool voice from the doorway. Elena stiffened, her stomach dropping. Lucian entered the cathedral like a shadow slicing through the light. His expression was polite, his steps quiet, but something about his presence made the air colder, sharper. Where Caelan's stillness felt like contained weather, Lucian's felt like a blade resting on the edge of a table, silent, but always ready. Your Majesty, Lucian said, approaching with a short, respectful bow. I see you've kept your appointment. Caelan did not look surprised. Of course, he replied. I gave my word. Lucian's gaze followed his briefly, then drifted across the room and landed on Elena. Recognition flashed. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in cruelty, but in calculation. The thief, he said calmly. You came. Elena's throat tightened. She stood, forcing her legs not to wobble. My name is Elena, she said, more firmly than she felt. And yes, I came. Lucian studied her, then shifted his attention back to Caelan. You see, one act of unexpected mercy, and already the pieces begin to move on a board you do not control. On the contrary, Caelan replied, I chose this move. Lucian's lips curved into the faintest smile. So you did, and the council will want to discuss it. Sister Maris glanced quietly between them, then turned to Elena. Come, she murmured. You might as well meet him properly now that you've already risked your life by being noticed. Elena's heart leaped into her throat. Meet him. But the sister was already guiding her forward, past the long tables and steaming pots, until they stood only a few steps away from the vampire king and his counselor. Caelan looked up as they approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The light from the high windows caught the faint silver in his eyes, making them seem less like a predator's and more like someone who had watched every sunrise from a distance and still hadn't grown tired of it. Elena, he said at last, her name sounding strangely careful on his tongue. You came. She nodded, unable to look away. You said you'd know if I didn't. And you believed me, he replied. There was the hint of something almost like wonder in his voice. You worked. All morning, Sister Maris answered for her. She has good hands and a stronger back than she thinks. Elena lowered her eyes briefly, a shy warmth creeping up her neck. She wasn't used to anyone noticing her strengths. Lucian watched the exchange with that same unreadable patience. So, he said quietly, mostly to Caelan, this is the human you altered tradition for, the one you stepped between and danger in full public view. Elena stiffened. She hadn't realized how much trouble she might have caused him just by existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. I didn't mean, she began, but Caelan lifted a hand gently. You meant to survive, he said. You do not have to apologize for that. The simplicity of his words hit her harder than any scolding could have. Her eyes burned again, but she blinked quickly, refusing to let tears fall here, in front of him, in front of everyone. Lucian's gaze sharpened, catching that almost tear, that almost crack in her calm. You are aware, he said slowly, that every act of mercy from a king becomes a story among the people, and that stories grow bigger than the truth. Caelan met his eyes. Then let this one grow, he replied. Perhaps a story of kindness is not the worst thing our names could carry. There it is, Lucian murmured. Your heart again, always your heart. The word carried more history than Elena understood, but she felt the weight of it all the same. Why do you say that like it's a curse? She asked quietly, surprising even herself. Lucian turned his head slightly, regarding her with new interest. Because, Elena, he said, voice still controlled but softer now, once before our king allowed his heart to guide him toward a mortal, and the cost of that choice nearly burned this city to the ground. The room seemed to contract around those words. Elena's eyes flew to Caelan. His jaw had gone tense, his shoulders rigid. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked not just powerful, but wounded. What happened? She whispered. Caelan's gaze slid away, a crack of old pain opening in his expression. That is not your burden, he said. But it is your warning, Lucian added, and mine. Silence stretched between them, fragile and full. Sister Maris cleared her throat softly. Whatever happened then, we are here now, she said. And right now, there are mouths to feed and a girl who has kept her word. She looked pointedly at Lucian. Surely even the council can allow one human to repay a debt in peace. Lucian's lips twitched as if he almost admired her courage. One human, perhaps, he conceded. But the others will talk, sister. They always do. They will say, the vampire king helped a thief. Perhaps he will help me too. Hope is contagious and dangerous. Caelan's eyes returned to Elena. Would you rather, he asked her quietly, that I had left you in the alley so no one would talk? The image flashed in her mind. Those men's hands on her shoulders, their anger, the darkness closing in. Her stomach clenched. No, she said. Then more firmly, no, I would be lying if I said that. His expression shifted, something easing almost imperceptibly. Then we will both accept the risks of that truth, he murmured. Lucian exhaled slowly, realizing that, for now at least, he was not going to turn his king away from this path. Not today. Very well, he said. Feed your poor, train your thief, rewrite your stories. His gaze darkened. But remember, Caelan, every kindness you show her will echo in corridors where mercy is spoken of as weakness. And there are those in the night court who have been waiting a long time for you to give them a reason to strike. The words settled like a shadow over the warm air of the cathedral. Sister Maris returned to the kitchen, giving Elena's hand a brief squeeze of encouragement before she left. Lucian stepped aside, speaking with one of the men repairing a broken bench, his voice low and measured. And suddenly, Elena found herself alone with the vampire king at the edge of the long table. She swallowed, feeling more aware than ever of the distance between what he was and what she was. Thank you, she said softly, for everything, for not turning away for this place, for trusting me at all. He studied her face with quiet intensity. I did not do this for gratitude, he answered. I know, she said. That's why it means more. Something flickered in his eyes, a spark of emotion he didn't quite hide in time. He looked away for a moment, then back at her. "You will keep coming," he asked, "each morning until your debt is paid." "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "And after it is paid?" he asked more carefully now. She paused. The question surprised her. She had expected him to be eager to see her gone once her part of the bargain was complete. Instead, he was asking about after, as if the idea of her simply vanishing from this place unsettled him. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "No one has ever planned that far with me before." He smiled then, not fully, not brightly, but enough to soften his features in a way that made him look achingly human. "Then perhaps," he said quietly, "we will both discover that answer later." As he spoke, the cathedral doors opened again. This time, it wasn't a counselor or a sister with a basket. It was a man dressed in dark, elegant velvet, a silver emblem pinned to his chest, a crescent moon biting into a crown. Elena didn't know the symbol. Caelan did. The newcomer bowed with sharp, practiced grace. "Your Majesty," he called, voice carrying easily through the hall. "Forgive the intrusion. The night court convenes today. The council has called an urgent session." Lucian's head snapped up. "Urgent," he repeated. "On whose authority?" The man's eyes flicked toward Elena for the briefest second before returning to Caelan. "On the authority of those who have heard interesting reports about last night." The words sank into the room like stones into water, sending ripples through every heart that heard them. Caelan's gaze hardened, the softness of a moment ago folding back behind layers of control. "So quickly," he murmured. "They move faster than I thought." Lucian stepped closer, his expression now fully serious. "I warned you," he said under his breath. "Stories travel, and your enemies do not sleep." Elena's pulse raced. "Because you helped me," she whispered. "They're angry because you helped one person." "It is never about one person," Caelan replied gently, his eyes locking onto hers as if trying to anchor her in this sudden storm. "It is about what that person represents." "And what do I represent?" she asked, her voice shaking. He held her gaze, the weight of his answer pressing against his throat. "A choice," he said softly, "a different kind of king." The messenger in velvet waited at the far end of the hall, stiff with formal patience. Lucian watched Caelan, torn between fierce loyalty and deep fear. Sister Maris paused in her work, a ladle in hand, eyes narrowed with protective worry. Elena stood very still, fingers curling into her skirt, realizing with a chill that her life had just spilled far beyond the edges of her own story. That simply by being saved, she had placed a crown in danger. Caelan straightened slowly, the air around him tightening like drawn bowstring. "I will attend your council," he said to the messenger. "Tell them their king is on his way." The man bowed again and withdrew. Caelan looked at Elena one last time, and in that moment, the carefully distant vampire king let something raw and unguarded show in his eyes. "If the council tries to use you to reach me," he murmured, voice so low only she could hear, "I will not let them." Her heart lurched. "How could they use me?" she asked. Lucian answered instead, his words quiet and grim. "By proving," he said, "that your life matters more to our king than his throne does." A shiver ran through Elena that had nothing to do with the morning chill. Caelan turned away, his cloak swirling softly as he headed for the cathedral doors, every step measured, every line of his body poised between power and vulnerability. At the entrance, he paused. Without looking back, he said, "Keep coming to the cathedral, Elena. No matter what you hear, no matter what they say, there is safety in this place." And then he stepped out into the rising light, walking toward a council that already tasted blood in the air, unaware that the most dangerous wound had not yet been made. It would not be struck by an enemy's blade or a traitor's hand. It would be struck, slowly and quietly, by his own heart. Some kings are destroyed by enemies. Others are destroyed by their own silence. Caelan had lived centuries believing he was safe as long as he felt nothing. But the moment he chose to care about one human girl, the walls he had built around his heart began to tremble. The night court chamber sat deep beneath the city, carved into ancient stone and lit by cold blue fire that never burned out. Tall pillars rose like frozen trees, their surfaces etched with symbols older than most of the vampires who sat beneath them. A long, curved table formed a half-circle around a single dark throne. Caelan stepped into the chamber with Lucian at his side, his boots quiet against the polished floor. 12 counselors sat waiting, their faces pale in the blue glow. Scholars, warriors, elders whose eyes held whole centuries, and younger lords hungry for influence. Above them all, on the highest stretch of wall, a mural showed a scene every member of the night court knew by heart. A vampire king standing in a city of fire, holding a human girl in his arms as flames licked the sky. Lucian's jaw tightened when he saw Caelan glance at it. They are already reminding him, Lucian thought, of the last time. "Your Majesty," said Lady Seraphine, a counselor whose beauty was as sharp as broken glass. "Thank you for gracing us with your presence." Her tone dripped politeness, her eyes did not. Caelan sat, folding his hands calmly on the armrests of his throne. "You called for me," he said. "I answered, speak." Lord Varros, a lean, hungry-faced noble with cold, thoughtful eyes, leaned forward. "We have heard troubling reports," he began. "Rumors of our king personally intervening in human affairs, in an alley, in full view of common men." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Caelan did not flinch. "I prevented 2 men from harming a young woman and turned a theft into labor and restitution. If that is troubling, perhaps your standards of trouble are too small." Seraphine's lips curved. "And this young woman, a thief, they say, human, weak, replaceable." The word made Caelan's jaw clench, but he forced his voice to remain level. "Her name is Elena. She was hungry. I have seen empires fall for less reason than that." "Ah," Seraphine said softly, "she has a name." Lord Varros tapped his fingers lightly on the table. "It is not the girl herself that concerns us, Majesty. It is what your actions suggest. The line between our world and theirs exists for a reason. When you step over it, especially for sentiment, others notice." Lucian stepped forward slightly, his face neutral. "The king acted within his right to maintain order in his city. He prevented bloodshed." "On humans," someone muttered. Caelan's gaze swept the table, calm but unyielding. "This city does not belong only to the night court," he said. "If humans tear themselves apart in our streets while we look away, what exactly are we ruling over? Ash." Lord Darius, an older vampire with iron-gray hair and weary eyes, shifted in his seat. "You speak of balance," he said slowly. "No one here wishes for chaos, but there is another concern." He gestured toward the mural on the wall. "Last time," he continued, voice heavy, "when you let your heart guide you toward a human girl, it did not end with balance. It ended with fire on the rooftops and blood in the gutters. We all remember the flames, Caelan. Some of us still smell the smoke when we dream." The chamber fell quiet. The memory pressed in from the stone itself. The rebellion. The human girl Caelan had tried to save. The way certain ambitious vampires had used his compassion as a weapon against him, twisting it into accusations of weakness, stirring fear, reaching for his throne. He had put the rebellion down. He had kept his crown. But the girl had died in the crossfire. He still heard her last words, sometimes in the hours before dawn. "I told you," she had said with trembling lips. "I was never afraid of you. I was afraid for you." Caelan's fingers tightened on the arms of his throne. "This is not then," he said quietly. "I have learned." Have you? Seraphine asked. Or is this simply the same story, beginning again with a different name? A younger counselor, Lord Caelan, spoke up for the first time. His voice carried a nervous edge, but his eyes were sincere. Majesty, he said, do you care for this girl? Beyond simple justice, be honest with us. Lucian turned his head sharply, but Caelan did not look away. Care, he repeated under his breath, tasting the word. He saw Elena's eyes as she stood in the alley, refusing to beg for herself. Saw the way her hands had moved at the cathedral, steady and determined despite exhaustion. Heard her small, honest voice, I don't want you to regret helping me. He exhaled slowly. I care, he said, in the way I care for any soul who has learned to call themselves replaceable. The council shifted uneasily. Seraphine's gaze sharpened. And if we told you, she asked softly, that this girl is a danger to your throne? Lucian's eyes flashed. Enough, he said. She is one human alone with no power. Humans do not need power, Varos replied, when they have stories. Already they whisper of a merciful king in the alleys, a king who feeds their children, a king who saves thieves, and where stories grow, expectations follow, hope spreads. Hope weakens fear, and our throne, Majesty, is built on fear. Perhaps, Caelan said, his voice suddenly like iron wrapped in velvet, it is time our throne rested on something stronger. The chamber stilled. Stronger than fear, Seraphine laughed softly, though there was no real amusement in it. What could possibly be stronger than that? Loyalty, Caelan answered. Not the loyalty purchased by terror, the loyalty given freely because a king has proven he will not abandon the smallest of his people. Spoken like a poet, Varos sneered, not a ruler. And yet, Lucian said quietly, the city is calmer now than it was under our last ruthless king. It listens to him because it believes he will not waste lives lightly. You have all benefited from that peace, even as you criticize the man who built it. Darius folded his hands. Perhaps this is not a question of whether the king should have helped her, he said slowly, but what happens now that he has? Seraphine tilted her head. For once, I agree with Darius. The deed is done. The question is what we do about the consequences. Varos leaned back, eyes cold. We cannot allow a human thief to become the symbol of our king's new heart. If enemies wish to move against him, they will look for something small and fragile that matters to him, something they can break. The air dropped colder. Caelan's voice grew dangerously soft. If anyone touches her to reach me, they will not live to regret it. Which is precisely the danger, Seraphine replied. You admit it. Her life matters to you. That is a weapon in the wrong hands. You cannot be everywhere at once, Caelan, not even you. Lucian's gaze flickered between them, mind racing. What are you suggesting? He asked. Varos's smile was thin. We are suggesting that, if the king wishes to keep his heart entangled, he must accept protection he has never needed before. Protection, Caelan repeated. Darius nodded gravely. If you insist on keeping this girl alive, we must hide her, guard her, make it nearly impossible for anyone to reach her without going through us. Seraphine's expression smoothed into something unreadable. Bring her into the night court, she said, not as a prisoner, as a ward of the crown. Lucian stiffened. You want to bring a human girl into our sanctuary, surrounded by those who resent her very existence. That is your idea of safety. If she remains in the open, Seraphine countered, any fool with a blade and a rumor could use her to test the king's resolve. At least within our walls, we know who would dare touch her. Caelan's thoughts sharpened like drawn steel. He imagined Elena at the cathedral, hands in soapy water, listening quietly to Sister Mari's speak. He imagined her suddenly uprooted and dropped into halls of stone and shadow, surrounded by eyes that measured every weak edge of her soul. If we bring her here, he said slowly. We drag her fully into our storms. She will never again live a normal human life. Lord Caelan swallowed. Majesty, does she have one now? He asked gently. A home, a family, a place to be safe. The question sliced through the arguments. Caelan closed his eyes for a brief moment. No, he knew. She did not. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a king and the ache of a man who knew he was about to change someone's life forever. Very well, he said. We will bring Elena under night court protection. But hear me clearly, she is not a token, not a hostage, not a lesson. Any harm that comes to her from within these walls or without will be treated as treason against my crown. Seraphine's eyes glittered. Varos's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. Darius gave a small nod, as if this had been the best of several uneasy choices. Lucian's shoulders dropped slightly in relief, and worry mixed together. And one more thing, Caelan added. No one tells her this is punishment. She will know only that I offer her safety. What she cannot know is that, by accepting it, she is also becoming the sharpest blade pointed at my heart. The council fell silent. They all understood what he was truly saying. If she is to become my undoing, let it be by my choice, not yours. Lucian bowed his head. As you command, my king. The session ended with the scraping of chairs and soft murmur of voices as the counselors drifted away, their minds already spinning webs of strategy and caution. When the chamber finally emptied, Lucian remained. You are making this harder than it needs to be, he said quietly. Caelan stood, looking up once more at the mural of fire and loss. Harder, yes, he answered, but perhaps also better. Lucian watched him, torn between admiration and fear. Do you truly believe that kindness will not be the end of you this time? Caelan's lips curved in a sad, small smile. If it is, he said, then at least my end will mean something more than silence. He turned toward the stairway that led back to the surface. I am going to the cathedral, he said. Lucian blinked. Already, we have just decided. And she will hear it from me, Caelan cut in. Not from rumors, not from frightened whispers, from the man who has taken that choice from her hands. Lucian hesitated. You take too much onto yourself. That is what kings are for, Caelan replied. And he climbed toward the light. Elena spent the afternoon washing dishes until her fingers wrinkled, and the skin of her hands stung from hot water and soap. She stacked bowls, wiped tables, carried buckets, and listened as laughter and soft conversation filled the once-empty hall. People came and went, thin-faced mothers with wide-eyed children, an old man with a bad leg, a girl younger than her carrying her baby brother. They took their bowls of soup, their hunks of bread, and for a brief moment their faces relaxed. No one knew that the food they ate came from coins and decisions made by a vampire king in a tower high above them. Maybe that was for the best. By late afternoon, the line at the door had thinned, and the kitchen had settled into the quiet rhythm of cleaning after chaos. Sister Maries hummed an old hymn under her breath as she dried the last of the pots. You did well today, she said, glancing over at Elena. How do you feel? Tired, Elena admitted. Then after a pause, and lighter, a little. Work does that, the sister said. Especially work that feeds someone other than yourself. Elena smiled faintly. I still don't know why he... The cathedral door opened. The sound was familiar now, but something in the air changed with it. The light seemed to bend. The murmurs dropped. Elena turned, heart jumping. Caelan stood in the doorway, the fading sun painting a halo of gold around his dark form. He stepped inside, and the warmth of the day slid off him like water on stone. He was still the same, quiet, self-contained, impossibly distant, and yet standing only a few steps away. This time there was something else in his eyes, a heaviness, a decision. Sister Mari's gaze sharpened instantly. She wiped her hands and moved toward the stove, giving them space while still staying close enough to intervene if needed. "Elena," Caelan said, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the vast room. "May I speak with you?" Her stomach tightened. "Of course," she said, drying her hands on her skirt without thinking. He walked toward her, each step measured. She realized suddenly that, while everyone else lowered their eyes around him, she looked straight at his face without meaning to. And instead of anger, he only ever seemed startled by it. "I attended the council," he said quietly when he reached her. Her breath caught. "Because of me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Because of choices I made," he corrected gently. "You are not to blame for what I do with my power." Elena searched his expression. "Are you in trouble?" His mouth curved slightly at that. "Kings do not get in trouble the way children do," he said. "But I have been questioned, warned, reminded of mistakes I made long ago." Her heart sank. "Because you helped me." "Because I cared," he answered simply. The honesty of the word dropped between them like a stone into still water. He drew a slow breath as if bracing himself. "The Night Court fears," he continued, "that you will become a target. They are not wrong. If any enemy wishes to test me now, they will look for the human girl the king dared to protect. You." Elena's fingers knotted in her apron. "So what happens?" she asked. "Do you send me away?" The idea hurt more than she expected. "No," he said. "I do something far more cruel." Her brows knitted. "Cruel." He looked away for just a moment, then back, his eyes rower than she'd ever seen them. "I take away the small, fragile freedom you have," he said softly.